The night was cold and still on the observation deck of the Zorn Collective's primary research station. Elder Ryu gathered the young alien children around him, their translucent bodies casting soft blue glows in the dimly lit room. The stars, outside the massive viewing window, twinkled like distant memories, each one holding a story that made the children's cores tremble with anticipation. June, the youngest of the group, pressed closer to Elder Ryu, his small crystalline form vibrating. With curiosity, the elder's voice began low and measured, a sound that seemed to weave through the very fabric of space around them. "Have you ever heard about humans?" he asked, his multi-chambered eyes scanning the faces of the children. Silence filled the room. The children shook their heads, their bioluminescent cores pulsing with a mixture of fear and excitement. Elder Ryu settled into his favorite storytelling position, his tentacle-like appendages curling around a holographic projector. With a gentle touch, he activated the device. Suddenly, the room transformed into a living memory. Images of a blue planet appeared, spinning slowly against the vast darkness of space. "Humans," he began, "are not like any species we have ever encountered in the known universe." The hologram shifted, showing bizarre landscapes, mountains that touched the clouds, oceans that stretched beyond imagination, forests so dense they seemed to breathe with their own life. The children watched, mesmerized. "They come from a small planet called Earth," Ryu continued. "A world so volatile, so unpredictable, that most advanced civilizations would have considered it uninhabitable. But humans? They thrived." Images of human cities appeared, massive structures of metal and glass, complex networks of transportation, cities that seemed to pulse with an energy unlike anything the children had ever seen. Machines moved, people walked, and everything seemed to be in constant chaotic motion. "Hey," another young listener raised a trembling appendage. "But how did they survive?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper. Elder Ryu's laugh was something between a chuckle and a warning. "Survival is not just about technology or strength. For humans, it was about something much more dangerous: imagination and determination." The hologram changed again. Now it showed humans in various environments: freezing Arctic landscapes, scorching deserts, dense rainforests, and even the vacuum of space. In each scenario, humans adapted, modified their environment, created tools, and survived where other species would have perished instantly. "They are creators and destroyers," Ryu said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "A species that can build magnificent cities and wage devastating wars in the same breath. Their technology grows exponentially. Their understanding of the universe expands faster than any known civilization." The children huddled closer, their cores flickering with a mix of terror and fascination. The hologram showed brief glimpses of human achievements: massive machines, complex mathematical equations, medical breakthroughs, spacecraft exploring distant solar systems. But it's not their technology that makes them truly terrifying. Ryu leaned forward, his voice now almost a conspiratorial tone. "It's their spirit, their ability to face the impossible and laugh in its face." Scenes of human exploration played out: astronauts floating in space, scientists making groundbreaking discoveries, explorers traversing unknown territories. Each image told a story of unbridled courage and relentless curiosity. June, unable to contain his excitement, blurted out, "Are they monsters?" Elder Ryu's response was calm but carried a weight that made the children shiver. "They are not monsters. They are something far more complex and unpredictable. They are humans." The hologram faded, leaving only the starry backdrop and the children's wide, terrified eyes. The story of humans was not just a tale. It was a warning, a legend, a bedtime story that would be passed down through generations of the Zorn Collective. Outside the observation deck, the universe continued its silent dance, holding secrets of a species that defied all known rules of existence. The massive communication array of the Zorn Collective hummed with tension. Captain Rihan watched the incoming transmission, his crystalline body reflecting the soft blue lights of the control room. Nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. First contact with humans was supposed to be simple, a standard, diplomatic approach used successfully with hundreds of other species. Send a greeting, establish communication protocols, begin peaceful negotiations. But humans were different. The first transmission came through unexpectedly. Instead of formal, diplomatic language, it was a burst of music, something called rock and roll that made the Zorn communication specialists recoil. Strange sounds mixed with rhythmic patterns that seemed both chaotic and structured. Then came the message. Not in any standard galactic communication format, but in something called English, a language that seemed to bend every known rule of linguistic communication. The words were direct, almost confrontational. Greetings. We are humans from planet Earth. Who are you? Captain Rayhan's second in command, Lieutenant Kira, ran multiple translation algorithms. Each attempt produced something slightly different. Some translations seemed friendly, others felt like potential threats. The human communication vessel appeared on their long-range scanners, a design that defied all known spacecraft engineering principles. It was asymmetrical, covered in what seemed like unnecessary external components, and moved with an unpredictability that made tracking difficult. They expected a formal delegation. Instead, they received a communication from someone who identified themselves as Mike from Engineering, a title that meant nothing in galactic diplomatic standards. We come in peace, the transmission said, but we're also really curious about your technology. Curiosity. Such a simple word. But from humans, it felt like a potential weapon. The Zorn had encountered hundreds of spacefaring civilizations. Each followed strict protocols. Establish distance, communicate carefully, minimize potential conflicts. Humans seemed to have an entirely different approach. Their spacecraft moved closer, not following any standard approach vectors. It wobbled, adjusted, changed direction multiple times, as if piloted by someone who was simultaneously playing and working. Communications continued to flood in. Technical questions, cultural inquiries, mathematical challenges, musical samples, something called memes, visual communication that seemed both nonsensical and profound. Lieutenant Kira watched in horror and fascination as human probes began scanning their ship. Not with typical scientific precision, but with what could only be described as enthusiastic randomness. They were collecting data about everything, from radiation levels to the specific frequency of the ship's internal lighting. They're not just scanning, Kira whispered. They're exploring. The difference was subtle but significant. Other species would request permission. Humans were simply investigating. Their curiosity knew no boundaries. Captain Rehan realized something fundamental about humans in those moments. They were not just a spacefaring civilization. They were explorers in the truest sense. Every interaction was an opportunity to learn, to understand, to grow. When the first visual communication came through, it was not a diplomatic team. It was a group of humans in what appeared to be casual clothing, drinking something called coffee, and looking genuinely excited about meeting an alien species. One human, wearing a strange cloth covering called a hoodie, waved directly at the camera. "Hi there," he said, as if they were meeting at a casual gathering rather than a potentially universe-changing first contact. The Zorn communication team froze. This was not how first contact was supposed to happen. There were protocols, procedures, diplomatic channels. Humans seemed completely unaware of or uninterested in these established norms. As the transmission continued, Captain Rehan understood something profound. Humans were not just another species. They were something entirely different. Unpredictable, chaotic, brilliant, terrifying. The first contact was not a nightmare. It was the beginning of something humanity would call an adventure, a word that would soon send shivers through every known galactic civilization. The war began quietly, almost accidentally. No one expected humans to become a significant military force. The Vex Collective, a massive interstellar empire, had conquered hundreds of civilizations. They saw humans as just another potential target. Commander, Sarah Lee stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, her eyes fixed on the multiple holographic displays. Around her, human soldiers moved with a strange mix of discipline and improvisation. They weren't following standard military protocols. They were creating new ones. The Vex attack came without warning. Massive battleships surrounded the small, human colony on the outer rim of explored space. Their weapons could obliterate entire planets. They had done it hundreds of times before, but this time was different. The first wave of Vex ships expected minimal resistance. Instead, they encountered something completely unexpected. Humans had turned the entire planet into a weapon. Agricultural machinery became defensive systems. Communication networks transformed into complex battle coordination platforms. Lieutenant, Mark Rodriguez noticed something unusual during the initial attack. The colony's farming tractors were suddenly moving with military precision. Irrigation systems became complex water-based defensive mechanisms. Greenhouses turned into makeshift weapon platforms. "They're using everything," Mark whispered to his teammate. The Vex commanders couldn't understand the human strategy. Where were the traditional defensive formations? Why were civilian machines participating in combat? How could a colony with limited military resources resist a full-scale invasion? Humans fought differently. They didn't just use weapons. They used creativity, adaptability, and an almost insane level of determination. One particular incident became legendary. A group of human colonists led by a former agricultural engineer named David Kim used a combination of farming drones and modified harvesting equipment to create a defensive network that completely disrupted Vex invasion plans. Their communication systems were equally unpredictable. Where other species would use complex encrypted channels, humans used a mix of advanced technology and old-fashioned problem-solving. They transmitted critical information through what seemed like random communication methods: music, visual, patterns, even complex joke structures. The Vex discovered that human technology wasn't just about advanced weapons. It was about turning anything into a potential tool of survival and resistance. A Vex battlecruiser attempted to disable the colony's primary power system. Instead of a traditional power grid, they found a complex network that was part biological, part mechanical. When one section was damaged, others immediately compensated. The entire system was alive, adaptive, almost intelligent. Commander Lee's strategy defied all known military understanding. She didn't just defend. She counterattacked in ways that seemed completely illogical to the Vex military intelligence. Supply trucks became mobile weapon platforms. Agricultural mapping systems became advanced reconnaissance tools. Even the colony's food production systems were weaponized in ways no one could have predicted. The humans called it adaptive warfare, a concept that terrified their alien opponents. Every resource was a potential weapon. Every citizen was a potential soldier. The entire colony was a living, breathing defensive organism. After 3 standard solar cycles, the Vex invasion force was completely destroyed. Not by superior firepower, but by human ingenuity, adaptability, and an almost supernatural ability to turn limitations into strengths. The few surviving Vex ships retreated, transmitting a simple message that would become a warning to all alien civilizations. Humans are not like other species. They do not follow rules. They rewrite them. Commander Lee watched the retreating ships, a slight smile on her face. They had survived. More than that, they had shown the universe something fundamental about humanity. It wasn't about having the biggest weapons. It was about how you used what you had. The interstellar conflict became more than a battle. It became a legend, a story that would be told in alien nurseries for generations. A terrifying bedtime story about a species that could turn a farming colony into the most dangerous place in the universe. The Zorn research team couldn't understand humans. They had spent years studying their cultural transmissions, and nothing made sense. Take emotions, for example. Humans laughed during moments of extreme danger. They cried when something beautiful happened. They created art about their deepest pain and sang songs about their most terrible experiences. Their emotional range was like a complex, unpredictable storm. Dr. Kai Park observed human communication recordings. In one transmission, humans were discussing a serious medical emergency. But instead of showing fear, they were making jokes. They used something called humor as a survival mechanism. A human named Michael was talking about losing his job. Instead of showing despair, he was laughing. "Well, this is another adventure," he said, as if losing employment was an exciting opportunity rather than a disaster. The Zorn researchers discovered humans had thousands of emotional expressions. A single facial movement could communicate more than entire Zorn diplomatic speeches. A smile wasn't just happiness. It could mean sarcasm, pain, hope, or complete irony. Their music was equally confusing. Sometimes slow, sad melodies would suddenly transform into aggressive rhythms. Their art broke every known aesthetic rule. Paintings that looked chaotic carried deep emotional meanings. Simple drawings could communicate complex philosophical concepts. Humans celebrated strange rituals. They would gather and consume massive amounts of food during events called birthdays and holidays. They would exchange objects called gifts to show affection. They would sing together, dance without apparent purpose, and create elaborate, social ceremonies that seemed to have no practical function. Their concept of family was particularly bizarre. Unlike most species with strict genetic connections, humans created families that included non-biological members. They would adopt children who were not their genetic offspring. They would form deep emotional bonds with individuals not related by blood. Love was another incomprehensible concept. Humans would sacrifice everything for emotional connections. They would travel across continents, survive extreme conditions, and change entire life paths for something called love, an emotion that couldn't be scientifically measured or explained. Their communication was a maze of complexity. A simple word like fine could mean anything from complete agreement to total disagreement. Tone, context, facial expression, all played crucial roles in understanding human language. Conflict resolution was equally strange. Where other species would use strict diplomatic protocols, humans would sometimes resolve serious disagreements through something called negotiation or compromise. They would actually listen to each other's perspectives and find middle ground. Their resilience was otherworldly. Humans would face massive challenges, and instead of breaking, they would adapt. A natural disaster wouldn't destroy their spirit. It would motivate them to rebuild, to grow stronger. Sports and games revealed more about their culture. Humans would compete fiercely but celebrate each other's achievements. They created complex rule systems for pure entertainment. They would invest enormous emotional and physical energy into activities that served no direct survival purpose. Their technological development was driven by something beyond logic, curiosity. Where other species would carefully research, humans would experiment wildly. They would try something simply because it seemed interesting, not because it was guaranteed to work. Religion, art, music, science, in human culture, these weren't separate domains. They were interconnected expressions of human experience. Scientific discovery could inspire a musical composition. A religious belief could drive technological innovation. Dr. Kai Park's final report was simple. Humans cannot be understood. They can only be experienced. The Zorn researchers realized humans were not just another species. They were a complex, living, breathing ecosystem of emotions, creativity, and unexpected potential. They were unpredictable. They were beautiful. They were terrifying. Centuries after the first encounters, humanity's legacy spread across the galaxy like a complex, living network. The universe had changed, and humans were at the center of that transformation. On a distant research station, Elder Ryu's great-grandson studied the historical archives. The stories about humans were no longer just frightening tales. They had become something more, a testament to an extraordinary species. Humans hadn't conquered the galaxy through military might. They had transformed it through something far more powerful: innovation, compassion, and an unbreakable spirit of exploration. The Galactic Collaborative Network, the largest interstellar organization, had its headquarters designed by human architects. The building was a masterpiece of impossible angles and adaptive technology. It seemed to breathe, to change, to respond to the needs of its inhabitants. Scientific breakthroughs came from unexpected sources. A human medical researcher named Lisa Chen discovered a universal healing technique that saved millions of species. Her research came from studying how human bodies fought diseases, combining modern technology with ancient healing practices. Diplomatic missions were always more interesting when humans were involved. Where other species would use strict protocols, humans brought creativity. They would solve complex political challenges through conversations, storytelling, and unexpected compromises. The terraforming projects across multiple star systems bore human signatures. Planets once considered uninhabitable were transformed into thriving ecosystems. Humans didn't just adapt to environments, they reimagined them. Education systems across the galaxy had been revolutionized by human learning techniques. They introduced concepts like creative thinking, emotional intelligence, and adaptable problem-solving. Learning was no longer about memorization, but about understanding and imagination. Environmental restoration became a human-led initiative. Species that had nearly gone extinct were carefully brought back through complex genetic and ecological programs. Humans treated planetary ecosystems like living organisms, understanding the delicate balance of life. Their art had transformed galactic culture, music that combined traditional instruments with advanced digital technologies, paintings that used light, sound, and interactive technologies, literature that explored complex emotional landscapes across different species and cultures. Technological development followed unique human patterns. Instead of linear progress, it was more like an explosive creative burst. A single human invention could trigger hundreds of unexpected innovations across multiple scientific fields. Space exploration became a collaborative adventure. Human explorers worked alongside species from different star systems, sharing knowledge, resources, and dreams. The boundaries between civilizations started to blur. Military strategies evolved. Conflict resolution became more about understanding and communication than pure destruction. Humans had shown that true strength wasn't about weapons, but about empathy and creative problem-solving. The younger generations across different species grew up with human stories, not as scary tales, but as inspirational narratives about potential, courage, and the power of imagination. Some alien cultures began adopting human celebration practices. They learned to appreciate moments of joy, to create rituals that brought communities together, to understand that life was more than survival. It was about experiencing, creating, and connecting. Economic systems were redesigned with human collaborative models. Competition became less about domination and more about mutual growth. Businesses were seen as living ecosystems that could adapt and evolve. On Earth, museums now displayed artifacts from hundreds of alien civilizations. The planet had become a cultural crossroads, a place of endless curiosity and exchange. The original fear had transformed into respect. Humans were no longer seen as a threat, but as partners, innovators, bridge builders between different forms of existence. Elder Ryu's great-grandson closed the historical archive. The story of humans was still being written. Each day, each moment, added new chapters to their extraordinary journey. They were not conquerors. They were not just survivors. They were creators of possibility.